The profound and wondrous Dharma is rarely encountered, even in 100 million kalpas. Having it to hear, accept, and maintain, may I taste the truth of the Tathagata's words.
Good morning. Lovely to see you all. Now I'm up. It's lovely to see everyone this morning. And I'm reminded of last week with our really wonderful Sangha meeting with so many voices speaking up to our current issues. The circle of Sangha is just so important. And then within the circle of Sangha, there's a Sangha of priests. And I'm wearing for the very first time the okesa of my old friend Yvonne Rand. So we express that circle of Sangha of priests, recycling and circulating among us our robes and other treasures. So recently I attended a book launch, and the nice thing about a book launch on Zoom with 150 people there was that there was also, in this case, a very active chat as well as question and answer. So there were voices of coming and going. The book was a launch for a book called Be the Refuge. And then I read the book because I was really taken with the book launch. It's about what it's like to be an Asian American Buddhist. And I had no idea of the problems it can entail. Actually, I hadn't even thought, period. Never a good idea. So I had a fascinating wake-up call, including, of course, a view of some of my own blind spots. It's a book of first-person voices for the most part. And then, like all really good books, it goes beyond its stated purpose. So I want to tell you a little about what the book brought forward for me, about being Asian American Buddhists and about being sort of white Western Buddhists and our intersections. And then I want to talk about this underlying being the refuge, which I found very juicy. So back in the 80s, I was supporting myself, my art making and my Zen training with freelance editing. So I had a whole row of books, reference books, because of course we didn't have the internet yet. And I was poking around in an information almanac, and it said that there were about 200,000 Buddhists in America. Well, there certainly didn't seem to be that many Zen Buddhists, so who else was there? So I looked at the footnote, and it said the source of this statistic was Buddhist Churches of America. Well, that sounds very inclusive, but I hadn't actually at that point, living in New England, heard of Buddhist Churches of America. When I looked that up, I found that that's the name of Pure Land Buddhism in the US. They took that name. They were originally the Pure Land or the Jodo Shinshu school using a Japanese name. But as World War II was beginning, they severed their ties with that and renamed themselves Buddhist Churches of America to declare their place here. It was a lovely thing to do, powerful thing, but of course it had no impact on the anti-Asian sentiment in the US at that time, and the ministers were the first people sent to camps, followed by everybody else. So just who are American Buddhists collectively? And if you look around your Stone Creek Sangha, other Zen centers, Vipassana retreats, Tibetan practice places, if you look at Tricycle Magazine, Buddha Dharma, Lion's Roar, if you check out the book lists on wisdom and Shambhala, you'd be inclined to think that whiteness is the face of Buddhism in the West. You look in the mirror, there you are. And you'd be also inclined to think that Zazen is the core practice of Buddhism in the West. But we're committed to long and wide views and upending our views generally. But we fail to notice what doesn't fit our story until something comes along to upend it. And that's one of the powers of Sangha right there. So near as I can gather, about 2/3 of the Buddhists in the US are Asian American in background, at least partly, because so many of us, of course, most of us have very mixed backgrounds. And there are Pure Land Buddhists, Buddhist Churches of America and others coming from Japan, and their schools originally Thai, Cambodian, Vietnamese, Sri Lankan, Tibetan, and more. So we all have a tendency to practice the Dharma with people who look like us, maybe have similar backgrounds, languages, customs. But no one is a label, and no one should be lumped into some clump identity. Not only is everyone from a varied background, but each is primarily a person, not a set. And another lesson is not to ignore what tends to be somewhat invisible to you. And that's hard, because what we don't see, we don't see. But it is our job to see what we don't see. That's really a lot of what our practice is about, and our Sangha is about. And our public discourse in this country generally is sort of overwhelmingly sort of white, Euro-American centered. And we don't even know what we're missing until it's brought up to us. So this book, Be the Refuge, has a subtitle called Raising the Voices of Asian American Buddhists, mostly young ones in this case. The author is a young Asian American Buddhist, and that's primarily who she's speaking with. And it's a wide range of backgrounds, and the book is a lot of interviews, so there's a wonderful range of voices. And one comment I heard, repeated in various ways, from, I think mostly that came from the chat or the Q&A, was to be a white American Buddhist is sort of sexy or is intriguing to other people, may see us that way. But to be an Asian American Buddhist is seen as retrograde, as being stuck in some assumed Asian cultural background that one has because one has an Asian American looking face or name. So their Buddhism is assumed to be their religion of origin. Turns out many of these cases, these young people, it's not. And also to be culturally derived rather than a chosen commitment, and to be inferior, just chanting or just taking care of altars or something like that. This is so prevalent an attitude that young Asian American Buddhists have sort of impressed on them, that many of them remain closeted about being Buddhists to avoid that kind of really unpleasant, disparaging projections. I thought that was very sad. Plenty of white American, we say, Buddhists have also get closeted about being a Buddhist because religion in general is assumed to be, in so many quarters, to be a narrow and negative thing. Prejudice is everywhere. And then the book had one unintended lesson for me. As each of the Asian American Buddhists interviewed was clear that he or she or they is unique and valid. And I see how white centering and white assumptions undercut that. But the many interviewees and speakers in this book, they tended to lump all white Western Buddhists in one undifferentiated lump. And I don't feel primarily defined by my whiteness or my femaleness, for that matter, but it gave me an uncomfortable bit of insight to how it feels to be lumped into one undifferentiated mass, and then maybe criticized for it as well, rightly and wrongly. It's very hard to be a very small minority in a Sangha. And that's one of the points that these young people made. And my own experience of that was first back in New England, in Valley Zendo, where sessions were small, maybe half a dozen people, but I was always the only woman. And the men always felt like to me that they were 10 feet tall, because I'm not very tall. And so I was not unwelcome, but I felt not quite belonging because I was this small minority. And then gradually that shifted, especially as over the years I became friends with the priest, Koshi Ichida. Continued to be friends when he went back to Japan. And then in Japan, when I was training there, I was, of course, a very small minority. I was the only non-Japanese in my monastery, but our robes were all alike, and that covered so much that I was brought in. Once they got over, was I going to fit in? Because I was an American, probably thought too highly of myself, that kind of stuff. Once we all got over that, I was just part of the community, a full member of the community. But then at one point, another American arrived to train there. She happened to live in Brazil, but she's originally American, and they thought we were sisters. We were about the same height. We both had maybe slightly round faces and pinky white skin. So they had trouble believing that we weren't we're not sisters, because we looked so much alike to them. So it's very useful to have these experiences, and it's very important to remember them, not to as a licking a wound, but to remember what it's like to be in a different set of shoes. For instance, to be a small minority, and how uncomfortable that often is. I was fortunate that my first connection with other schools of Buddhism, in particular Pure Land, which is what Buddhist Churches of America is from, was way back when I lived in my cabin in the woods in New England. And I would go down to Smith College and audit Buddhism courses on Buddhism. And they had a wonderful professor named Taitetsu Uno. He was a great teacher. And he was also a Pure Land Buddhist priest, because his father had been, and he was as well, but he didn't practice as a priest. But he taught it some, in and among other things. I'd till then sort of disparaged devotional Buddhism in my head as just. What was that just is such a, there's just sitting in which we are wholehearted, and there's the other just, which is kind of a disparaging diminutive. I thought it was just prayer to a Buddha viewed as a god. And luckily, Tai disabused me of that. He said that Pure Land Buddhism is the center of it, is the primal vow of salvation, resounding through the universe, beginningless and endless, and a powerful magnet so strong that it draws us toward it even if we're unaware of it. He says, because I read a couple of his books, he says, the vow of compassion is like the great earth, for all the Buddhas of past, present, and future throughout the 10 directions arise from it. Oh, well, that's my vow. That's the Bodhisattva vow, as we call it. So it's a very powerful way to see the Bodhisattva vow. It opened my view of it, because we foolishly, I think, many of us at least, tend to think the vow is sort of lying there latent until we pick it up, and until we take it up based on our individual effort or individual choice. But it's not a vow that just you personally pick up, or that vow that you personally make when you wake up to the reality or truth of Dharma. It's already present in the universe, already powerful, already working. And we're each responsible for our own practice. But Western individualism colors our views so much that we can easily wind up thinking that it's my vow, my practice, my awakening. And this core Pure Land teaching that no one can awaken themselves, that awakening and insight come to us as gifts, is a powerful corrective to our individualism. Now, Dogen had that, but it's hard to hear 800 years ago. There are many such gifts, both within Zen and all the other Buddhist traditions, that illuminate and expand our understanding of our own practice. A harder lesson for me was that Zazen is not the sine qua non of the Dharma. And the Dharma is not an exclusive club that sort of throws you out if you don't toe some line of correctness called Zazen or anything else. But it took me time, years, decades, to recognize the power of Dharma practice based mostly in other practices, bowing, chanting, altars, ceremony, just personally aiming to live the vow of compassion in the world. How narrow of me. Now, my teachers, of my 4 teachers, all of them were Japanese. 3 of them came to this country in order to teach a Zazen-based Zen. Zazen is not central to most Zen practice in Japan, but it was central to them. And that's why they wanted to come here, where there was a receptive audience for them. But they didn't teach me arrogance. They just taught me Zen. And then I went to Japan to train and made a point of asking Japanese Soto priests what their practice was, because I knew most of them don't do Zazen, or at least not regularly. And most did an hour-long morning service in their temple, often alone. And this practice was that central grounding practice force in their lives, the way morning Zazen is for me, that allowed them to go out into the world. And for me, that grounding morning practice is lighting the altar, lighting incense and candles, bowing, taking refuge, and then sitting down. For me, it's that's my circle of the way in the morning. And if you do none of the above practices, but investigate the Dharma and work to live in its terms, to live out its vows, well, that's the Dharma. Practice is always relational. It's never isolated. And it's all about compassion and wisdom, inextricably the movement and activity, the stuff of our lives, the true stuff of our lives. So to express our gratitude to be able to take up the path of Dharma and the Bodhisattva life, we can take many, many paths. And practice doesn't need to be formally shaped to be valuable, although practices are tremendous supports. And some kind of practice is a hallmark of Buddhism. That's one of the features of the Dharma that draws Westerners in, is that there's something to go to, something to do, and some shape to it, something you can activate in your own self and your own life and participate in actively. But the kind of practice, myriad vows, myriad paths, myriad actions. So the title of this book, Be the Refuge, came from be the refuge you wish to see in the world. And that's what really caught me. One of the very vocal young Asian American Buddhists who had been a very active blogger, and so he knew many people and helped the author connect to many other people, Started out with a blog called Angry Asian American Buddhist, or something like that. And then he matured in a very short life. As he was dying of leukemia, his last post on his latest blog was, "Be the refuge you wish to see in the world." Usually we say take refuge, right? We take refuge in Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. And that can be confusing. I spent a long time, years, decades, chewing on that take refuge. What did that mean? But our practice begins and ends with being accountable, connected, and engaged. So not just taking refuge or going for refuge, but being refuge, enacting refuge. So in this very imperfect world, our vow is to live as we wish the world would live. And thereby we become part of the solution rather than the problem. So we each have to live our values. Values aren't something we have in a file somewhere or in a pocket. We don't just live by our values, we live our values. They are alive as we live them. So, taking refuge in Buddha. What is it to rely on Buddha? Which is one of our most common ways of seeing taking refuge in Buddha, is relying on Buddha, finding something there that is supporting. But what is Buddha? So if Buddha remains outside you, you'll always be lonely, uncertain, and inadequate. I read something recently about committed Christians, that many of them feel a strong personal connection to God, and many of them, at least some of them, instead of feeling secure in that, feel inadequate because they feel the gap between themselves and the God whom they value and know. So we need to not fall into that gap of a Buddha somewhere outside us in the face of which we're inadequate. Uncertain, sure. But being the Buddha refuge is living inclusively, accepting each thing as it is in itself, seeing through our delusions best we can, seeing them as delusions. Being the Buddha refuge is taking up the Bodhisattva way. It's vowing to see reality clearly and inclusively and to live in terms of that clarity. So be the Buddha refuge. And then when we have taking refuge in the Dharma, well, that's taking the teachings to heart. Taking on not only the teachings of impermanence but taking on our fears of it. We're all afraid of change and afraid of death in one way or another. It's taking on our fears of too close connection and our fears of too distant others. So being the Dharma refuge is saying we are impermanence. We are change. It is what and who and how we already are. It's not something awful that's happening to us. It's our maturing. It's our loving. It's our sitting in our insight. And it's our aging and death as well. And being the Dharma refuge says we are interdependence, and we can see through our fear of being too close to others. We can see through our fear of those we see as other. And instead, if we are the Dharma refuge, if we are interdependence, we have the ground in us for reaching out with love. Bodhidharma, we have very few reasonably authentic teachings of Bodhidharma, since they were talking about 1,500 years ago, more than that, 1,700 years ago. But as far as one of the more likely to be authentic teachings of his. He speaks of our practice as according with the Dharma, living in accord with the teaching of reality, living as change, living as connection. And then there's taking refuge in Sangha, recognizing the importance of like-minded community. Not same-minded, that would be stultifying. Not gatekeeping to create a cocoon or a nest, but including and valuing, seeing Sangha as precious and taking part in it. Being the Sangha refuge, well, that's what we're doing here. That's what we did last week. Managed to, all of us, meet and talk and bring up all our voices, even though we were just a bunch of little pixels, in one sense. To be the Sangha refuge is to be the Sangha you wish to have. So we all have a tendency to feel that this group we are part of has a core that we're just outside of. I think I've told some of you this before. I was in my 30s. I went on an outward bound up in the Boundary Waters in Minnesota, the group of a dozen women. And being women, we like to process. So one day we were sitting on an outcropping of rock, taking a break and processing, and went around the circle, and each woman said that she perceived, after we'd been together a week nonstop, she perceived a really well close-knit group that she was just outside of, on the edge of, not really outside, but on the edge of. But every one of us had that experience. It was a circle with no center. And that sort of blew away from me, that sense that I'm on the edge of the mural in the middle of this group. We are the Sangha refuge together. And this Sangha has quietly developed connections, stronger and stronger connections over the years, over 25 years. This is our 25th year. So now in the pandemic, we can continue to be Sangha even in pixels because we have an experience of Sangha together. And it wasn't just pixels. Last Sunday's meeting was our live voices together. And without your voice, there is no Sangha voice. And Sangha is a root of the Dharma. Initially, I think Shakyamuni spoke of Buddha and Dharma, but he formed a Sangha and he took it extremely seriously. And then it became Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, the three treasures, the three roots. And you need to be the refuge of Sangha if you want to be the refuge of Buddha and Dharma, because none of them happened in a vacuum or in isolation. We turn to Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha so we can see beyond what we already think, what we already know. We are the refuges when we take refuge. Every time we say, I take refuge in the Buddha, in the Dharma, and the Sangha, we are being the refuges. We are bringing them to life. We are having them live enacted in the world. And we aim to be the refuge for others as well as ourselves. We aim to live our vows, and we aim to live by truth, knowing that this aim is not just for ourselves, but for all of us. The Bodhisattva vow has no walls. To be the refuge you wish to see in the world is to keep opening your mind and heart. What could be better? So, comments, thoughts, questions, voices? Unmute yourself and speak if you're so inclined. I don't know if Liz is here today. I was over at the Zendo on Thursday meeting with an engineer, and she came by. She was going for a walk with Robin, and before Robin arrived, we had a little. Oh, there, Liz is there, and she pointed out that none of us is what people project on us or the group we seem to belong to. I don't see my own skin, so I don't particularly think of myself as white, but I have to remember that I am part of a privileged group, whether I wish to be or not, I am. And of course, I have utilized that privilege over and over. And we are each not who others see us as. And also, we are who others see us as, and we need to be aware of that. So we had a very nice discussion. And then, after the engineer left, he had already gone when Liz came by, and I was picking up some stuff outside, cardboard, and putting it in a bin. And Liz called me the abiding trash collector. It was very nice. So are there other... We had our exchange on the subject of Be the Refuge back there at the Zendo on Thursday. It was very nice to do it live. I don't know if anyone else has anything to say.
Get it? Oh, okay, now I can. I'm interested in the idea of the Sangha as being sort of a body of people. I feel like I'd like to see more of an extension of it, or an inclusion of people outside as being sort of also seen as part of the Sangha, and reaching out or drawing in. I'd like to see the borders kind of more fluid.
Mm-hmm.
How do you feel about that?
I feel great about that. I mean, there are many ways for that to happen. One thing we have never done, I've never done, being a kind of a introverted little one, is there are a number of different Buddhist churches and groups and temples in Sonoma County, and we don't particularly ever connect with each other, hardly at all. There's Pure Land, there's Inmanji right down the road. Well, some of us have been there once or twice, and there's Thai and Cambodian Buddhism in Sonoma County, and other Zen groups, some of which we know a little bit. So that's one aspect. But yes, the whole community is our Sangha, and I would like to find ways for us to extend our sense of Sangha much wider. Thank you.
Yeah, I was going to say that all along, I sort of thought that we as a group would be more active outside the boundaries of the way that I see this was I've been working at the food bank, the Redwood Empire Food Bank, and they have every week, they have people that are groups, they get, 15, 20 whatevers of their group. They might be, I don't know, an insurance company or something like that come in and do this work. And, that's something I would love to see our Sangha do, just to reach out like that.
I think so too. I remember when I first moved to Minnesota and encountered Sangha really for the first time, and Katagiri Roshi was talking about the importance of community, and then I perked up, and it turned out he was meant our little Minnesota Zen Center community. And I think, yes, one time at Regal, we brought that. This was obviously a very long time ago. And at that time, it turned out that almost everybody in the group had already a particular social engagement, and that was sufficient for them. But I think, especially now that we're bigger, it would be lovely to have a connection, a project kind of social connection that isn't about the other. I mean, I'd like to see the other Buddhist groups, but that isn't about that. But that's about some kind of participating in the community. And so I think, yes, let's make that a high order of business when the pandemic is over enough to allow that, so we can meet and go places.
Yeah, the food bank, they make it like you wear your mask and they do it outside, so we don't have to wait until it's over.
That's interesting.
We did participate with this with the asylum family, and our Zen center really came through with lots of food and funding, over a year's time. And now that family, I want to report, moved to Indiana where they could survive better financially, but they came back to apply for a permanent residency, and we had a reunion, and it just reminded me what we're all talking about, in an informal way, through sharing what each of us what we're doing. We've the group has jumped in and been really supportive, and the Sangha and Stone Creek itself.
Yeah, that's one way, important. Someone in the Sangha doing something that they think would work, where the group as a whole or a large number of us could be helpful, will draw us in, just as Liz did. And then last Christmas, is that also at your behest, Liz, where we worked with a community church to provide bags for the
another
shelter?
That was great.
Yeah. So yes, let's draw on our collective wisdom to see if we might find projects that we could contribute to.
Mm-hmm.
So, Sinette, the idea of refuge, I think of, and I know it's a huge issue, but it's right outside our door, of Anne sleeping and making a home outside the door of the Zendo. And not as a group, individually or as a group, really I haven't found a way to articulate what it is that we're providing, or are we providing it, or are we ignoring it? So I think there's opportunity certainly for conversation, for gathering, for talking about, the idea of bringing other churches together, but really toward what end? Are we just wanting to open our social eyes, or do we want to direct our attention to obvious need? And that's something that I would like us to look at as something that we can engage in from now and on into the future. The coming together, the grouping. Charlie said something in his talk, or when he was introducing the change a few weeks ago, about having the group come together to express ourselves, to talk, to share feelings. That I don't feel we've really had in a focused way for, I don't know that we ever have, but it seems like it's a start for us to develop our intercommunication skills amongst ourselves, to be able to focus on needs that we can address, and to be able to open that to other Buddhist groups when we feel that we actually have something to offer.
Mm-hmm.
So that's my 2 cents today.
Thank you.
Can I just say that I agree with you, Annette? And I've been struck, I guess, as someone fairly new, at how insular Stone Creek is from its community, the surrounding community, and that while it's clearly people have an interest in compassion and social justice, it kind of stays on the cushion, or that's just the way it appears to me. So I agree. I think that conversations about values and how that can be brought out into the world would be in keeping with our beliefs.
Thank you, Kiddo. Yes, I hear a groundswell of very positive energy here.
And I would also like to add, oh, sorry, go ahead. Oh, okay. I would also like to add that I think, Keiko, maybe it's because we are all thinking it, but we don't really have a time in which to express what we need to express as a group. I don't think, I think everybody is, or a lot of people are wanting to do something, or it has crossed their minds that maybe we need to connect with others outside the Sangha. But again, I think it's the vehicle for that hasn't happened. I think there are some members who might have talked about it would be nice if we could communicate our views, and our desires as a Sangha, but other than the meeting today, we don't have that time. And that might be what the next step could be, is if we want to go in that direction, we might need to schedule a time to talk so that could happen.
Someone pointed out recently, thank you, Vicki, it's sort of in that line that we aren't having occasion, even within the group, that's in the insular sense, to actually talk very much about issues or values or ideas. It's so that the Sangha meeting was a breath of fresh air that way, but it was brief, each person speaking, and that we might actually dedicate some Sunday talk times, or all of it, or half of, or all of it, to a theme, a topic that comes up for Sangha members that we'd like to speak about together, and that can also generate some energy to move outward. It's not instead, but we need to get more active with each other in our voices, know each other better, and also I think that may also help us move outward.
Yeah, I think so.
We participated, holding signs with Black Lives in solidarity with Black Lives Matter. But what struck me is, a few people, gravitated toward doing that, but it would have been an opportunity to talk to the whole Sangha, to have a conversation about who is doing it and who isn't. I mean, in other words, the why, how people feel how people are feeling as a whole doing it, or are some people objecting to it, or it's an opportunity to know, as is said, to know each other better and go deeper, not just a few of us going off in one direction or another.
Well, and when a number of us do something outside together, we know each other differently. It adds also to our knowing each other by doing things outside. We have that much more shared life experience and expression of our values, and it reverberates.
Yeah.
I wonder Holly, if there's any chance that at I keep seeing these things for the Redwood Food Bank, and I sort of don't know how to engage. And I'm wondering if sometimes they allow just a one time that you could organize it in one time. We could go and work there, and then we could come back and discuss part of whether that was something we wanted to do, but just to try it out, if that's possible, or you'd could
probably to find out how they shape their volunteer. That's really all we're asking at this point, is how they shape their volunteer teams. Are they one time with a bunch of people, or one person every, that kind of thing.
Yeah, but I was also wondering if we could just try it one time, you know.
Well, we need to know what their framework is that we could say.
So, you know, I know Keiko also does work at the Redwood Food Bank, and I do work at the Redwood Food Bank, the Redwood Empire Food Bank, but I do it through I've been working with Interact Club at Annalee High School for 25 years, and we volunteer there regularly as a group. The thing that I see here is we all have our volunteers, things that we do out in the community or our community involvement, but it's sort of separate from the Sangha. And maybe that's another discussion to have about, you know, I mean, my involvement with these different things is through Rotary, and it used to be through community church, which that was very much in the community on a bunch of different levels. So that's sort of how we become a community, you know, an energy in the community. Anyway, that's that.
Peggy, I was going to say, yeah, they're so ridiculously organized. You just have to go online to Redwood Empire Food Bank, and it explains everything. And it would be very easy, for instance, for me to put a group together, and you just go once, and every time I go there, they have people there, and they stand outside and they tell you what you're going to do, and you can go here, and you know, it's fallen off the log. And yeah, we could just do it once.
Let's look into that and get a picture of it next week or the week after, whenever we have a little more information. Why wait? And see if there are a number of people who'd like to do it. It's a great first step, and maybe even a second step.
Yeah, thank you. Because I think I'd like to do it with some of the people from Stone Creek.
Yeah.
I also, during your talk, there's a number of times that Michael and I did retreats through Thich Nhat Hanh, where very few, most of us weren't white. Most of the people there were Asian. And it was really a very good experience because I was uncomfortable. I didn't know how to do things, and things were done differently. And that's great to be in that kind of setting where, I mean, you know, I didn't like it while it was uncomfortable, but it's good practice. And you know, I found I didn't wash the dishes right. And one time I was we went to a monastery up near Mount Madonna, which was a Vietnamese monastery. And it was interesting how they housed us. They housed all of the couples in the same room, which probably would never have happened in another situation. But it was just perfectly normal. So, I mean, I guess I just recommend that when we get opportunities to put ourselves in situations where we're the outsider, it's good to do.
Yeah.
I'm on the board, so this has all been very interesting. And on the next board meeting, I'm going to bring up the subject of outreach, which is sort of my responsibility on the board. I mean, I've been doing my best locally, but I totally agree with this conversation that we need to reach out more, especially with the Latino community. But I'm going to bring this up at the next board meeting and see if we can coordinate all the different Sangha members and find out what they're doing, and then go for there and see what else we can do in outreach.
Oops, I unmuted myself. I'm just reminded that I was just asked by Susan Shaw of North Bay Organizing Project, if Stone Creek would be interested in establishing a phone tree so that when issues are coming up around rent control or various issues when they're doing press conferences or going to the Board of Supervisors, could there be a phone tree where our group would want to, we would call out for support for specific things that would affect the immigrant community. So I'm just realizing that was an invitation. That was something I was going to explore and taken, but here's an opportunity to explore that. John, did you hear that?
Why don't you and John talk on that one?
Okay, sorry.
I do want to briefly say something about that topic too. I love what everyone is saying about engaging in the community. I would like to do it more with a service hat than with an outreach hat, if possible, and to do it with a spirit of listening and listening to what needs are locally and seeing if there's some way that folks can help with that, instead of saying, oh, come to our, come to us, we know, we have this great thing. And it just feels very different to me, those two approaches.
Mm-hmm.
I think most of this, Thomas, is what I'm hearing is mostly a wish to find a little bit service outreach, not outreach to come in, but it does strengthen the group here to do that.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. I know, I agree. That's what I'm hearing. I just wanted to, I heard a little bit of each and I just wanted to say that. Thank you.
Okay, well, time is going by. Is there a last comment or shall we close? This has been very interesting.
I just wanted to support the idea of perhaps a talk, opening this space during the talk, because I know when we did the politics and we were, gaining momentum with awareness of the need to engage in politics, we would have our Sunday talk and then it would break off into a group afterwards. So people would go home and others would stay. And then that group would get smaller and smaller and smaller because we were engaged, or it would get smaller and smaller. So to keep a focus in this hour that everyone is here and it is a Sangha context, I support that. I encourage it. And thank you.
Okay. Corin, Dojin, let's.
All right. The closing verse is in the chat. And four great bodhisattva vows, beings are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to end them. Dharma gates are infinite. I vow to enter them. The Buddha way is boundless. I vow to realize it.